Well, it's already been proved to be the year of the veterans. Lester Piggott's ridden 2 winners this afternoon. The money says Mordecai Richler tonight. The favourite is Brienne Moore. I think John Mcgahn will win it at 4-1.
Everyone says it's the most boring shortlist of all time. I think it's been entertaining reading how boring it is and then going on to find how entertaining the books themselves are. I like Mordecai Richler. He's a racy, humane kind of writer, but my money's for some time been on A.S. Byatt. I put my £5 on at Lab Brooks. She's written a book about books, but a good book about books. I think it's Byatt tonight.
It's the strongest shortlist for years by a very, very strong group of writers. There's not a dud book there. My certain favourite, and I think the best book of the bunch, is John McGahan's short and masterly evocation of Irish rural life. The best Irish novel since Ulysses, in my opinion.
I hope they're going to choose Mordecai Richler because his book is the one that has real breadth, exuberance and scepticism. It's been a very safe year and they've chosen a safe list. Consequently, there's nothing experimental and nothing very political to write home about.
Well, it's a very distinguished shortlist, but I'm not sure it's a terribly exciting or sexy one. But I think this year it must be time for a woman novelist to win again, and I hope that Antonia Byatt win it. It's a very strong read indeed that people will enjoy.
Well, if you think about it, does it really matter who wins? I mean, have you read any of the books? Could you bear to read any of the books? Think about these things that Dillon's is doing. They're giving the books away at a discount. Wouldn't you give them away at a discount? Would you want to buy them?
Good evening and welcome to our special coverage of the 1990 Booker Prize for Fiction, coming to you live from the Late Show studio and from Guildhall in London. If you were keeping count during that title sequence, you will have totted up 22 Booker Prize winners, to which tonight will be added a 23rd, unless the prize goes to someone who's already won it before, which would be a first in Booker history. We'll know one way or another in just under 50 minutes when the chairman of the judges, Sir Dennis Foreman, will get up at Guildhall to announce the winner. Before then, you'll be meeting the authors and getting your own chance to assess their books, as well as hearing the opinions of our own panel of judges. Although there are now other prizes in the British literary calendar that carry more money, none carries more weight and prestige than the Booker. If your novel makes the shortlist, it will guarantee you the kind of publicity and sales that publishers dream of. To be a Booker Prize winner, as well as bringing you £20,000, will add an estimated 30,000 to 60,000 copies to your hardback sales, as well as lucrative foreign and paperback sales, and you can be sure a hefty advance for your next book. It will also guarantee you a small place in British literary history. To gain all this, you must have published a book in Britain during the last year and be a citizen of the Commonwealth, Ireland or South Africa. In a moment, the 6 books. But first, the state of play from Guildhall in London with Tracy MacLeod.
Good evening from Guildhall. Here among the publishers, agents, literary editors and captains of industry are seated 6 people who are putting up a brave pretense of a healthy appetite. In less than an hour, one of them will be richer by £20,000. As for the others, well, they'll just have to be content with the giant boom in sales that comes with being a shortlisted author. And all the shortlisted authors are here. Beryl Bainbridge is British and was shortlisted in 1973 with The Dressmaker and the following year with The Bottle Factory outing. She draws on her experience as an actress in rep for her novel this year, An Awfully Big Adventure. A.S. Byatt is also British and a former Booker judge, though this is her first time on the shortlist. She draws on her formidable academic career for her novel, Possession. The last British writer is Penelope Fitzgerald, becoming almost a regular fixture at this dinner. She was shortlisted in 1978, won the prize in 1979 with Offshore, and was shortlisted again 2 years ago with The Beginning of Spring. Her novel this year is The Gate of Angels. The Irish writer John Mcgahn, by contrast, is a first-time guest at the Booker dinner. His second novel was banned for obscenity by the Irish Censorship Board, but he has managed to win at least 10 literary awards. His shortlisted book is Amongst Women. Brienne Moore was born in Belfast, but has taken Canadian citizenship. Shortlisted twice before, his recent novels have been thrillers exploring moral and political dilemmas. His shortlisted book, Lies of Silence, is the bookie's favourite at 9 to 4. Mordecai Richler is also Canadian and is perhaps best known in this country for The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. Many of his novels explore the world of Canada's Jewish community, and his shortlisted book, Solomon Gursky Was Here, is no exception. Those are the 6 authors. Earlier this afternoon, 5 people sat in judgment and chose their winner. The panel of judges changes every year, and the members are sworn to secrecy about their deliberations. This year, disappointingly, they've managed to refrain from leaks, hints and scandal. They've read 109 books, many of them more than once, to reach the final 6. As always, what they left out provoked yelps and grumbles, but the book wouldn't be complete without a bit of a Barney. Here they are. The chairman of the judges is Sir Dennis Foreman. One of Britain's great and good, he's a seasoned committee man. He is deputy chairman of the Granada Group, as well as chairman of the Royal Opera House. Susanna Clapp is a journalist and reviewer. Her literary credentials include a spell at Jonathan Cape and The Listener, and currently she's deputy editor of the London Review of Books, as well as reviewing for The Independent on Sunday. Walton Litz is Professor of Literature at Princeton University in the United States. He's a specialist in 20th century English and American literature, and is spending this academic year as a visiting professor at Oxford University. Hilary Mantel is a writer and novelist. Her last novel, Flood, a comic morality tale set among Catholic clergy in a northern mill town, was one of those books that seemed likely to make last year's Booker shortlist, but didn't, so no doubt she'll be sympathising with the also-rans. Kate Saunders is a writer and journalist with a weekly column in the Sunday Times. She won a different sort of prize, the Betty Trask Award for Romantic Fiction in 1986, with her novel The Prodigal Father. So those are the authors and judges. Now, for anyone who hasn't quite got round to reading all 6 books, The Late Show talked to each of the shortlisted novelists. Solomon Gursky Was Here by Mordecai Richler crossbreeds Canadian and Jewish myth in an eccentric family saga, obsessively unfolded by alcoholic writer Moses Berger.
I needed a lever to pry open the convoluted history of the Gursky family, and Moses Berger became that device as someone who was obsessed with the Gurskys from childhood because of a resentment about the treatment of his father, who was a failed poet and wrote speeches for one of the Gurskys. And through his obsession, I was able to lead you in and out of the mysteries of the Gursky family.
Moses retreated to his cabin high in the woods overlooking Lake Mcgahn and reheated what remained of last night's coffee, lacing it with a shot of Grey-Sacks cognac. The Gurskys. Ephraim begat Aaron, Aaron begat Bernard, Solomon, and Maury, who then begat children of their own. Moses conceded yet again that his wasting life had been drained of potential years ago, thanks to his obsession with the Gurskys. Even so, it could still be retrieved from insignificance, providing he managed, between bouts of fermented crab apples, to complete his biography of Solomon Gursky. His work table was strewn with pages from Solomon Gursky's journals, tapes made by his brother Bernard, clippings, file cards, and notes. Dipping into the mess, he retrieved his copy of the Newgate Calendar Improved, being interesting memoirs of notorious characters. He opened it, pretending he didn't know that beginning on page 78, he would discover an account of the early years of Solomon Gursky's grandfather.
I set out, as I said, to write a novel about Solomon Gursky, and then the other generations, Ephraim and the others, sort of imposed themselves on me, and I became more and more interested in them, so I found myself writing passages set in 19th century London and in the Arctic in the 19th century, but I didn't set out to write a generational novel. I did set out to fiddle with concepts of time, and it's not a chronological novel, as you know, and that interested me as a writer, and so it was, I mean, it's the most ambitious of my novels. I don't know if it's the most successful or not, but it's certainly the most ambitious.
An Awfully Big Adventure by Beryl Bainbridge, set in the 1950s, describes the experiences of a 16-year-old girl, Stella, an aspiring actress, when she's taken on to work backstage by the Liverpool Playhouse.
It's sort of just what it is after the war, but, it's based on my own experiences and the fact that everybody you used to see in the street, or an awful lot of them, had some kind of defect. They either had a face that was burnt, or they'd lost a leg, or they were in some way crippled. They were the walking wounded, and so it's mixed up with the experiences of a young girl of that time and what it's like being in the theatre, and mixed up with Barry's play Peter Pan. There are numerous books on the meaning behind this particular play, Meredith said. I've read most of them, and have formed the opinion they do the author a disservice. Sufficient to say that I regard the play as pure make-believe. I don't want any truck with symbolic interpretations. Stella thought the play peculiar. Considering it was meant for children, it was surprising how many of the characters were unpleasant, even Tinkerbell, who she supposed was some sort of bad fairy. Mary Dear as Peter was downright sinister. There was a scene between her and Wendy in the home under the ground which caused Stella to tremble. It was soppy enough to begin with. Babs was telling the lost boys a story of how mothers always waited for their children to return. See, pointing upwards, there is the window standing open. So they flew to their loving parents, and pen cannot describe the happy scene over which we draw a veil. The link between Peter Pan, Barry's play, and my book is that the play is full of lost boys or lost children, children who have been abandoned, supposedly by their mother. And the link in the novel, with the novel, is that the main character, the girl Stella, has been abandoned by her mother. But in both the play and the book, you're not quite sure, at least hopefully you're not sure till the very end, whether she's half making the whole thing up, whether it isn't a fairy story on her side as well as on Peter Pan's side.
Brienne Moore's Lies of Silence is a sparely written novel of suspense. When the wife of hotel manager Michael Dillon is held hostage, his personal life becomes enmeshed in the violence that is the public face of Ulster.
The thing I wanted to show in this book is that for most people in Northern Ireland, violence is not something that occurs in their own lives. They see it on television just like the rest of us. They're not walking around in ghetto areas where there are patrols and where there is discrimination against them. And my hero, Michael Dillon, is one of these people, a middle-class person who actually would be quite happy if he was living in London or somewhere else, has no particular desire to see Ireland freed, and actually in that way represents the feelings of a large number of people in Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland.
Mr. Harbinson, like themselves, had probably never seen an IRA man in the flesh. There had never been demonstrations or Sinn Féin parades in this part of the city. Mr. Harbinson was, by the sound of him, almost certainly a Protestant, but equally likely he was no more a religious Protestant than Dillon was a religious Catholic. And now, watching him go off for his morning walk with his dog, Dillon felt anger rise within him. Anger at the lies which had made this, his and Mr. Harbinson's birthplace, sick with a terminal illness of bigotry and injustice. Lies told over the years to poor Protestant working people about the Catholics. Lies told to poor Catholic working people about the Protestants. Lies from parliaments and pulpits. Lies at rallies and funeral orations. And above all, the lies of silence from those in Westminster who did not want to face the injustices of Ulster's status quo.
When these political events enter his life, they present a moral dilemma which is excruciating for him. And I wanted people to read the book in one or two sittings and just be carried on by the story, but afterwards possibly to reflect that the Northern Ireland situation could be universal. It could happen to us, it could happen to any of us, and we could be in a position where our own lives, which are all important to us, are being damaged or destroyed or altered in some strange way by political events with which we have nothing in common.
In A.S. Byatt's Possession, a cast of modern-day literary scholars vie with each other to find the truth about the relationship between two imaginary Victorian poets, Randolph Ashe and Christabel Lamotte.
What a walk, in what a wind, never to be forgotten. The clashing together of our umbrella spines as we leaned to speak, and their hopeless tangling. The rush of air carrying our words away. The torn green leaves flying past, and on the brow of the hill, the deer running and running against that labouring, mounting mass of leaden cloud. Why do I tell you this, who saw it with me? To share the words too, as we shared the blast and the sudden silence when the wind briefly dropped. It was very much your world we walked in, your watery empire, with the meadows all drowned, and the trees all growing down from their roots as well as up, and the clouds swirling indifferently in both aerial and aquatic foliage. The passage I read came from a letter from the poet invented by me, called Randolph Henry Ashe, in 1859, to a woman poet called Christabel Lamotte. And the novel is a kind of detective story come chase, in which two rather prissy modern scholars, very much set about with modern literary theory, make a discovery of the cache of letters written by these two poets to each other. And it's partly a sort of detective story romp in which a wicked American biographer with a very large checkbook and a rather sort of trodden-upon English scholar attempt to get possession of these letters. It plays on the word possession because there's also sexual possession between the two pairs of lovers, and it works out as a romance. And I wrote it really because it's really a novel about how to read, because I partly feel that modern scholars have forgotten how to read with passion, and my modern characters learn to read my 19th century characters with the passion with which my 19th century characters read and wrote. So it's about the past being, in a sense, more alive and more violent and somehow more full of wonderful words than the present.
John Mcgahan's Amongst Women is set in Ireland and traces the final years of Moran, a fierce and embittered Republican, as he takes leave of his family and his past.
The book centres around Moran, and it's a struggle for power and how the women and how or any underprivileged group negotiate power.
All they felt he had to do was to turn his life over to them, and they would will him back to health again. It ran counter to the way he had managed his own life. He had never in all his life bowed in anything to a mere other.
He's kind of an archetypal character. You know, it's a very patriarchal society that the war grew out of, the War of Independence. And in a way, they never got used to the peace. And in a way, Ireland is a country that never became a country. That's almost become a kind of families as separate little republics. And the family always has fascinated me in that way, because I see it as a strange halfway house between the individual and a larger, fuller society.
After years, he had lost his oldest and best friend, but in a way he had always despised friendship. Families were what mattered, more particularly that larger version of himself, his family.
One of the fascinating things about family is that you'll often find people within families that aren't conscious or introspective people, and they actually are often great psychologists or great novelists talking about other members of the family. And these are not necessarily people that will read books, but they actually know them so well that they become almost mind readers.
To die was never to look on all this again. It would live in others' eyes, but not in his. He had never realized when he was in the midst of confident life what an amazing glory he was part of. He stopped stubbornly before the door. "I never knew how hard it is to die," he said simply.
The Gate of Angels by Penelope Fitzgerald takes place in the scientific community of Cambridge in 1912. Its central love story poses the question, can reason and passion coexist?
I was in Cambridge one day and it was very wet and windy, and I saw cows apparently dancing in one of those bits of grass, rough grass that there is in the middle of Cambridge. And the boughs had come down from the trees, and they were so excited by being able to get at all these leaves that they were rolling and, as I said, seemed to be dancing. And I thought, well, this is amazing in the city of maths and science and logic, that these wild things should be happening. And the story really came from that. And it's about a young man, Fred, who's a physicist, and Daisy, who's a hospital nurse. They meet entirely by chance as a result of a bike accident, and I thought that would fit into the background of the book in early atomic research. Everything really arises by chance from the chance combinations of atoms. When Fred came to, he felt terribly thirsty. Surely, if it was half-time, they'd come and give him a bit of lemon. He was in bed, on a yielding mattress, which showed that wherever he was, it couldn't be in college. The room seemed to breathe. Something, anyway, was breathing. It was quietly lit, but enough to throw on a wall papered with unknown flowers the shadows of an unknown washstand, with its jug and basin. Over him there was a white quilt and a white counterpane. On top of the white counterpane, 6 inches away from him, he could see the left hand of a young woman, large and clean, with a broad gold ring on the 4th finger. He put out his hand and touched it. Her face was turned away, but he could see a quantity of hair, done up at the moment any old how. Her eyes were shut. My God, what luck, he thought.
Well, in Guildhall now, they are now settled into their main course, so while they work their way through saddle of English lamb en croûte, we sip our mineral water and do our own judging here. My panel tonight is Germaine Greer, the writer and critic, Eric Griffith, lecturer in English at Trinity College, Cambridge, and the novelist Maggie G, who was also one of the judges for the Booker Prize last year. It took this year's Booker judges 2 hours to make up their minds. We've got about 20 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin, first in alphabetical order, not necessarily to continue, with The Beryl Bainbridge, An Awfully Big Adventure. This is a novel about a young adolescent growing up through her first job as an actress in a Liverpool rep post-war. Maggie G, you're an expert on the kind of mixture of passion and compromise that goes into picking a shortlist. Had you been one of the judges this year, would this have been on your shortlist?
I'm afraid not, and in a way I'm sorry to begin with this one, because it's the one I feel most negative about. I'm a fan of earlier Bainbridge novels, but this one I find very irritating, because the central character, Stella, is, I think, a strong one, but there are so many other characters, none of whom are ever really visually established. You can't see them in your mind's eye. So I ended up on page 77 with 6 characters who I literally didn't know who they were. And of course, if you don't know by that point in a book who characters are, you're never really going to care. So I thought this book was disappointing.
Eric?
Well, it's a story about a charming little girl written by a charming big girl, I suppose, isn't it? And the thing about charming little girls, and some charming big girls, is that they run the danger of being arch when they're self-conscious of their charm. And I think the book teeters on the edge of an awful self-consciousness about its own charm. I'm susceptible to its charm. It's set in Liverpool in the early 1950s, and I grew up in Liverpool in the early 1960s, so lots of the detail of the book I find very touching and alive, although some of it's inaccurate. But it has this terrible difficulty. It eventually wants to become serious, but it's been so fey all the way through that I think it can't really pull itself off.
I think it thinks it's a funny book, Germaine. For me, the dialogue had a kind of sub-Alan Bennett quality to it. It was trying to be idiosyncratic and regional and non-sequiturs. It didn't make me laugh. I didn't find it very funny.
I don't think you're supposed to laugh, actually. I think it's a study in perversity. And she's not a charming little girl. She's actually completely mad. And you take her as a charming little girl because that's the literary convention. It's only when you realise that the strange bits of completely inexplicable nastiness that she comes out with, like the the moment when she uses one of those those 4 o'clock words, those 4-letter words that you really can't use on television when she's being asked about somebody in the theatre. And her peculiar bits of self-dramatisation. You're given hints everywhere that this kid is really off the wall. She's also living in a madhouse. The Liverpool Playhouse is a hotbed of nastiness, perversity, self-seeking, drunkenness, hysteria, etc. I think it's written to épater les bourgeois, and what's absurd about it is that by this time Beryl is a bourgeoise, and so she looks back to this extraordinary Liverpool, which is a tapestry of gargoyles and grotesques. Every time you step into the street, you see one of her damaged people. You see children deformed by poverty, bare feet, beggars, blah, blah. And it's meant to upset all our assumptions about nice girls, nice books, and so on. I think it doesn't because you don't believe it. I didn't believe a word of it, I'm afraid.
Right, well, that's 3 pretty fingers down for the first one. Let's move on to the Brienne Moore book, Lies of Silence. Moore is a Canadian by adoption, although he is, of course, Irish by birth, and he's returned to Belfast for this novel, which is a rather tightly plotted moral thriller about a young hotel owner who has to make a decision, really, as to whether or not to save his wife or a hotel full of people threatened by a bomb by the IRA. Eric Griffiths, did you like this any better?
Yep, this is your one. The bookies have got it
this
right.
Is it?
This is the one. This is, I think, by far the best of all the books. I'll try and say something simple about why it's so good. The opening sentence. At 9:15, just before getting off work, Dillon went down to reception to check the staff roster for tomorrow. It's an incredibly boring, unpromising sentence. It's just the sort of sentence that Valérie, who was very snooty about novels, would always say. It's typical of what's terrible about novels. They're always telling you that people got into trains at 4:45 or did this. But in fact, 50 pages later, the question of whether something takes place at 9:15 or 8:15 is going to be absolutely crucial in this novel. It's a thrilling novel, and it's morally thrilling. It's very, very serious. It's beautifully written. It's tactful in its effects. It's, I think, the only really good novel in the whole batch.
Certainly for me, it was the only genuinely compulsive novel. I found it quite hard to put down once I'd picked it up. Did you have it in your hand from beginning to end, Germaine, or was it easy to toss aside?
No, I didn't, but that's because I missed Belfast. I kept wanting it to be like Belfast, which is quite a specific place with specific drama and specific rhetoric and a specific way of being. And I felt, in fact, as if I was actually watching an American television series about Belfast in which people would talk a lot of good sense about how both sides were wrong and this is how you get caught up in bigotry and blah, blah. It was going to be desperately even-handed. And the drama and the self-deception and the muddle of being in Belfast, the fact that if you think of Ireland as a single country, then Belfast is all wrong. And if you don't, then Belfast has got to stay the way it is. I mean, it's just a completely insoluble dilemma about which people necessarily feel passionate. I kept being irritated by things like Moira. I was fascinated by Moira.
This is his wife.
But Moira's behaviour kept being devalued all the time, as if it was just neurotic and stupid. And I couldn't understand if he really wanted me to take an independent point of view.
Well, let's bring Maggie in here. Maggie.
I actually thought Moira was a wonderful character, and I thought a very sympathetic character, and one who surprises you. She starts off as one kind of character, and slowly she comes forward and becomes a very strong and sympathetic character. What I think is remarkable about this book, and that I think is a great achievement, is that the writing, in a way, is clear as water. He's pared it down to the point where this book could be read by anyone. I think it's the only book on the shortlist that could be read by anyone. And contrasting that to the Bainbridge, where I think she shows a kind of lack of concern for her readers. The 20th century serious novel can't afford to despise its readers, otherwise it loses them to film. And I think this is a wonderful book for that reason, and I think it would be the best winner too.
I'm going to stop. I know you've got more to say, Eric, but they're halfway through their lamb there, and we're going to get caught behind. Let's move on now to the Penelope Fitzgerald book, which is a novel, I suppose, about science and romance, really. It's set in Cambridge in 1911, when kind of the beginnings of nuclear physics are starting to chip away at the accepted certainties of science. And it's also a love story about a young physics don who falls off his bike and head over heels in love with a young nurse from the lower classes. Germaine, were you charmed? Oh, look at that face.
I wasn't charmed, oh dear. I wish I could be more easily charmed. Life would be much more fun. I found this book immensely irritating. There is, I feel that it's actually a cod Catholic novel. It's one of those novels about the inadequacies of atheism and the inadequacies of logical positivism and so on, how really life is a mystery and without an act of faith we can't understand it. And in order to prove it, I'm going to tell you a completely incomprehensible story about made-up things that aren't even remotely plausible, like the College of St. Angelicus. And just to be bloody, I'm going to put Whittlesford on the wrong side of Cambridge and bung it in the fens, as if it didn't really exist. Because, of course, it doesn't really exist. Because the only thing that really exists is God or something, or the eternal verities, whatever they might be. I don't actually think Penelope Fitzgerald has a clue. I mean, I wonder sometimes whether she's really being one of God's fools. She's actually deliberately being jolly silly because it makes her much holier.
Maggie?
No, I like this novel, actually. It is quite a small novel, but then writers don't write books in order to win the Booker Prize, and I think it's as big as its length allows. I like the way she sets up what I do think is a rather silly, all-male, enclosed academic world, and then brings into it, there's an eruption of a working-class woman who sets the cat among the pigeons. I rather like the stuff about the horrors of early 20th century hospitals. I like the stuff about the terrible injustices that working-class women who tried to enter hospitals as nurses went through, and I thought it had a very nice shape to it. I agree, in a way, it's a book that's so warm in tone, even when it's dealing with pretty dreadful things, that it runs the risk of being too easily charming. But no, I like this book.
Eric, it's been said about her before and will be said again, she is quite an exquisite stylist. She puts a lot of work into the style. Do you enjoy her writing?
No. The last sentence of the book is beautiful, and it might be worth reading all 160 pages to get to the last sentence. It's not beautiful because it's stylistically brilliant, but beautiful because it's so poised in terms of what's going to happen in the novel. But, I mean, my dentist and I were talking about this novel the other day, and we agreed we don't like semi-realistic novels set in Cambridge, because, you know, Cambridge is semi-real enough anyway, and all this sort of thing that Germaine complains about. This character, I mean, I think Maggie's got a good heart to want to be in favour of this working-class woman getting into Cambridge and so on, but this working-class woman doesn't exist. She's called Daisy, and she's called Daisy because she comes into the novel on a bicycle, and we all know about daisies and bicycles. That's about how real she is.
But there are women called Daisy who ride bicycles.
There are indeed, but that doesn't make them convincing in novels, I think, does it?
All right, well, I'm dying to know what your dentist thinks of the other three, but we'll move on in a second.
She has her views.
I want to stop for a very brief moment. You haven't, in general, I have to say, been very nice about these three novels, with the possible exception of Brienne Moore. Are you being a particularly hard bunch tonight, or is this somehow reflected, as was suggested in our credit sequence, that this is not a good year, not a good shortlist? Eric?
Well, Maggie will know better whether it's a good shortlist. I don't think that they're a good bunch of novels, and we haven't got to the really bad ones yet, I think, actually.
Well, I like 3 out of 6, which maybe isn't bad for a Booker shortlist. I think it's a shame that there weren't any younger writers there. I think there's always more popular interest when there are some younger people there, because maybe they feel it will make more difference to their careers. Right. But I think any shortlist is as good as the best book on it, and if the best book wins, then I think it will have been a good year.
All right. Briefly, Germaine, bad, good shortlist?
I think the whole point about the prize is you give it to a book that's not commercial, and I hate seeing it go to books that are commercial. But publishers suggest them, and publishers suggest books that are commercial, so what to do?
OK, well, let's move on to the next three. In some respects, the three we've covered have been, in sort of scope, small novels, and the next book certainly is not a small novel. It's the book by A.S. Byatt called Possession. This is a lot of things, this book. It's kind of part a literary detective novel, part a Victorian pastiche, part a satire on modern lit crit. And it tells a story of two contemporary academics trying to search out an affair between two Victorian poets. All the invention of A.S. Byatt, all the poetry included. Maggie?
Well, I think there's an enormous amount in this book. It's a very richly worked, dense book. It's generous in its imagination. It's very solid. She sees solidity as a great virtue of a work of art. Now it comes down to a question of taste, because I feel most novels have got too many words in and too many things. And for me, I suppose in the end, perhaps there were too many rooms with too much furniture, too many meals with too much food, too much colour, and yet that's the strength of the book in a way. I think a wonderful book to give as a present, but not
To whom?
Right, not perhaps. Eric, clearly, I can see from your face you would not like it as a present.
No, I'd give it back to you. Well, I think it's a novel written by somebody who's not an artist. What
does that mean?
Well, it's the sort of novel that I'd write, you see, if I was foolish enough not to know that I couldn't write a good novel. It's the sort of novel that's written by somebody who's done A-level courses, taught them and taken them in what novels are like. That is, novels have recurrent patterns of poetic imagery. Recurrent patterns of poetic imagery right through. See something made out of green glass in this book, you might just think it was a little green glass object. But no, it will recur in a significant way. The whole book is put together with this tedious Lego-like construction of cross-references between the 19th and 20th century. It's really very easy it becomes predictable and dull. I think it's clearly the work of a thinking person. She's trying to think about some quite interesting questions about the ways in which people are trapped in the different ways in which they talk about love in a 19th century way or a 20th century way, that there's no freedom, no simply free discourse. But I think as a novel, it's an absolute disaster.
I have to say, I liked it very much. I thought it was enormously rich and worked on a number of levels, even if it wasn't successful on all of them. Germaine?
I think it's more ambitious even than we've so far been able to indicate. And it doesn't surprise me that it doesn't quite pull it off. It is, of course, pastiche, but all pastiche is actually a rethinking of an idiom which isn't valid anymore. So it is a bit like looking at William Morris wallpapers that have been printed by modern methods. The colours are different. It's not a question of whether they're better or worse, but is the difference itself interesting? I got irritated with little green leather boots and the careful colour coding of everything. Some people are white, splendidly regular, splendidly null, and like that. And it seemed to me to creak a lot and to slow right down, so sometimes you were suffocating under a weight of verbiage. But I still like the way that Antonia Byatt sort of madly starts to invent a whole new set of female myths, which we just don't have. And it's the myth of the baby you lost, the baby that's crying and all. And I just wanted to see where she was going to go with it. I thought she was way out on the bowsprit about to fall into the sea. She'd done so many things that were over the top. And there are one or two places, there's one of the fairy tales, which has such a loose stride and is so beautifully written. I'm afraid I rather wish that she'd had a very crabby editor who told her every time something didn't work, every time something was without life. And I also wish she hadn't got Randolph Henry Ashe, because he's a bore.
All right, I'm going to stop you because they're already on to their forest fruits in blackberry liqueur and we're really going to run out of time. Let's move on to the fifth book, which is the John Mcgahn book, Amongst Women. This is a deliberately kind of slow-moving account of a claustrophobic family life in rural Ireland in the 50s, made up mainly of women, this family, but ruled with a rod of iron by the patriarch moron. Germaine, let me start with you on that one.
Now, the more I think about this book, the more I like it. I didn't enjoy reading it because I couldn't understand the style. It seemed to me I was reading a synopsis of the book. It all read to me like the story so far. It was so spare on details. And then, as I thought more about it, I thought, the extraordinary thing is that what comes out of it is the structure of masculinity. It's a man among women who make him into what he is, or he'll be angry. If they want him to be angry, they need him to be angry. They've cast him as the superego, and he has to play that role. He's lonely, he's unhappy, he's full of tangled tenderness and attachment to his land, although he doesn't understand it and can't farm it and so on. And it builds for me. I think it's actually, I suspect that it's the most original book we've got to deal with, because it does refrain from telling the story in obvious terms.
Maggie?
Yes, it's a very quiet, dense, concentrated book. It's not in any way as exciting as The Moor, but I think it's very good in its own terms. And I think it's a terrific achievement to make a book out of a story where essentially all that happens is that the daughters come back to visit every weekend or every summer, and the father gets older. And yet, although in a way it's not an easy read, it is gripping reading, and I think it has a terrific ending.
Right. He's been called, of course, the Irish Chekhov, Eric.
Yeah, well, Nigel Williams said in the intro that it was the best Irish novel since Ulysses, which I found unbelievable. Nigel Williams may not have ever heard of a man called Samuel Beckett, but John Mcgahn certainly has, which is why the main character in this book is called Moran. It was a very foolish thing to do, to call a character in your book, who did a book about an old man dying, by the same name as a character in a Beckett book, which is about a similar topic. This is a very, very badly written, vapid and mediocre book, which has sentences in it like, "The little wrens and robins flitted hither and thither on the long, low churchyard wall." This is not spare, it is really just dull.
Very quickly, Maggie, because we've got one more to do. Very quickly, come back on that.
Well, you can pick out a sentence from any book and make it look silly. I think in a way it fits in with the fact that they're set back in time. This rural community is set back in time, and therefore, to me, words like hither and thither were not an obstruction. I mean, I found it part of his style.
But I think there's also a counterpoint of commentary on what kind of man he is and what he's out of touch with.
All right, I'm sorry, we have to go on, because otherwise Mordecai Richler will never speak to us, because we'll not have covered Solomon Gursky was here at all. This, I suppose, is the nearest in the whole shortlist to a comic novel. This Canadian writer in search of the Gursky family, this flamboyant family of bootleggers. His quest takes him through 150 years of Canadian history. Did you laugh, Eric?
No. No, I'm afraid not. Mordecai Richler will never speak to me after what I'm going to say about it. This novel needn't have been written, I think. What it is, it's a great... it's like one of those American salad bars. You go in, there are alfalfa sprouts, bits of cold bacon, bits of avocado. It looks marvellous. You think, I can have a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of the other. Put it all in your place, it's a chaos of free choice. It seems to me really quite purposeless. No, it's the all-singing, all-dancing Thomas Pynchon, Joseph Heller, Kurt Vonnegut, cosmically irreverent American big novel that I think we're all heartily bored with now.
Heartily bored with it, Jermaine?
I thought it was homage to Garcia Marquez, I have to say, that what you do is you take Love in the Time of Cholera and stick it in the snow and ice, and you've got wonderful ways of making the banal seem preposterous and the preposterous seem banal, and he plays the same trick over and over again. It's the most marvellous combination of tremendous wit, I think, but also enormous vulgarity and the most cloying Yiddish schmaltz.
Yes.
Terrible sentimentality. So that after a while you think, I can't, I'm sorry, any more gefilte fish and I will throw up.
I have to say I laughed. I just didn't laugh enough times for the number of pages. Maggie?
I think maybe the problem is the same problem that there is with the A.S. Byatt. It is funny, and there is perhaps too much of it, but the real problem is it's the story about somebody making a story. And I think readers have a great need for stories. I think human beings have a great need for stories. But writers are the ones who have needs for stories about stories. And in the end, readers get bored with them unless they're very, very good. Writers like Beckett or Nabokov can pull it off, but most writers can't quite. And they lose force. They lose that central throat-gripping quality that really great stories have.
All right, well, those are our version of the 6 Booker shortlists. It's now time to hand over to Tracy MacLeod at the Guildhall to find out who the winner is likely to be. Tracy.
So in a few minutes we'll learn who the winner will be. The chairman of Booker, Sir Michael Caine, is about to invite Sir Dennis Foreman to announce the judge's decision.
We come now to the highlight of the evening, and I'm sure you've all been waiting for it. It gives me great pleasure to call upon Sir Dennis Foreman to announce the winner of the 1990 Booker Prize.
Your Excellency, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, your panel was faced with an entry of 109 novels. The range was vast, the quality variable, and some of the print was too small for my eyes, which packed in when I'd notched up about 75 and I thought I was Bookered. But with the help of new glasses and of my colleagues, whose eyes were younger and stronger than mine, we had little difficulty in cutting the 109 down to 25, amongst which we knew the final 6 and the winner itself must lie. In selecting the last 6, we were forced to exclude some outstanding books. Amongst others, Salman Rushdie's fantastical tale, Haroun and the Sea of Stories, a wonderfully imaginative and funny book. William Boyd's Brazzaville Beach, about the horrors of warfare between 2 races of chimpanzees. The Great World by David Malouf, an Australian saga covering 2 world wars. But our shortlist was finally agreed as follows, in alphabetical order of authors. An Awfully Big Adventure, Beryl Bainbridge. A young girl brought up in the slums of Liverpool joins a local rep company and becomes privy to its domestic relationships and internal politics. A wonderfully accurate evocation of theatrical life. Funny, pathetic, eventually tragic. A dark and brilliant book with an immediate and touching appeal. Possession by A.S. Byatt. Two young academics, through dedicated detective work, discover the romantic and sometimes shocking life story of a famous Victorian poet and his relationship with a secret lover. The complex plot unfolds smoothly and with an ever-increasing momentum, and the pastiche poems of the dead poet add an extra dimension. A great novel by any standards and in any company. The Gate of Angels, Penelope Fitzgerald. A touching story of the love between a fellow of a mythical Cambridge college and a robust young Cockney female who meet each other when their bicycles collide. The scene is set so expertly that we come to believe that St. Angela's College, with its gates that never open and its ban on any form of female intrusion, must really have existed. Penelope Fitzgerald pulls off this period piece triumphantly and throws in a ghost story for a bonus. A Life Amongst Women, John Mcgahn. Michael Moran lives and dies peacefully in his cottage farmhouse in the heart of rural Ireland. In the struggle against the Black and Tans, he was a crack shot and something of a hero, but now his life is contained within the circle of his family. The heart of the book lies in the old hero's relationship with each one of his children as they grow up. Mcgahn has produced a deeply impressive novel, austerely written, Irish as can be, but with universal appeal. Lies of Silence, Brienne Moore. A man drives through the suburbs of Belfast with a bomb fixed under his car. If he parks it where instructed by the IRA, it will go off and kill dozens of people, along with the one targeted person. If he does not, if he rings the police, the IRA will kill his wife. This is the central dilemma in a thrilling book. It is wonderfully well done and written, as so many good novels are, apparently without artifice. Solomon Gursky was here, Mordecai Richler. The Gurskys are a Jewish family, piratical and ingenious, whose founding father settled in Canada and gave rise to generations of Gurskys whose chicanery in business and rascality in politics make the real-life tycoons of today look like plaster saints. This huge, rumbustious story, astonishingly funny, wholly absorbing, is one of the great picaresque novels of our day. Ladies and gentlemen, those were the finalists. 6 fine books. And your judges, I can assure you, longed to adopt the solution of the dodo in Alice in Wonderland, who, when he was asked to adjudicate as to the winner of the caucus race, decided that everybody had won and all must have prizes. Alas, the stern discipline of Booker would not allow us this solution. And so I have to tell you that the winner is A.S. Byatt, Possession.
I believed it was deeply bad luck to prepare anything before coming. I convinced myself absolutely to the point of depression that I was not going to win, and then became interested in everybody else. And I don't quite know what to say. The Booker Prize does, I think, promote reading. It causes people to get very excited, not only about the books which get shortlisted, but about all those very, very good books which ought to have been shortlisted and were not. And my book was written on a kind of high, after stopping being an academic, about the pleasure of reading, to which I feel also Booker contributes. I should also like to say, having said that, and thank you very much to the judges and to Booker, thank you very much to my publishers, especially Carmen Khalil, for believing in my book. Thank you.
So, Antonia Byatt wins the 1990 Booker Prize with Possession, her fifth novel. It's been a good year for her. She was awarded a CBE in this year's New Year's Honours List. That's all from Guildhall. We'll hand back to Sarah in the studio for a quick reaction.
Antonia Byatt. Eric Griffiths, you can have the first but not the last word.
I'm neither surprised nor pleased.
That's simple. Right,
simple.
Maggie.
Well, it's wonderful for whoever wins. I'm very happy for her.
Right, Jermaine.
Congratulations, well done.
You think
now write a short one.
Do you think it was think it was the best book?
Oh, I suppose. I mean, I don't even know what that means.
All
it
right.
was the most likely prize winner, I think.
OK. And that brings to a close our coverage of the 1990 Booker Prize for Fiction. From the studio, with thanks to Jermaine Greer, Eric Griffiths and Maggie G, we bid you good night. And we leave you with the celebrating scene at the Guildhall and A.S. Byatt, the new Booker Prize winner.
Next.
I knew.